Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to yet another edition of Doom Mod Madness. This time round, we are checking out a gameplay mod by the name of DoomReal. This is a mod that combines the weapon roster of Unreal with this little known game. You might not have heard of it, it's kind of obscure. It's called Doom. In any case, the map pack I'm using with this is known as Doom 2, the way it did. A map pack I'd certainly recommend, as it's pretty damn solid in its own right, and it also features a nice steady sense of progression when it comes to weapon acquisition over the course of its levels. The opening level here introduces us to a number of lower tier weapons. The one I'm currently wielding, known as the Stinger, it's got two fire functions. The primary lets off a stream of fast-paced projectiles, kind of like a light chain gun of sorts, whereas the secondary functions much more similarly to the likes of the shotgun. The primary weapon you'll find is the Auto Mag, a pistol that can be fired in both standard primary fire and gangster deluxe sideways fire, which offers a faster fire rate but also a loss of accuracy. And for those of you wondering, yes, you can indeed dual wield the Auto Mags, though you do have to enable the option via menu, and if you do, just be warned, it is very OP. Now, a short while into the second level, I acquired a weapon I didn't entirely recognize. I mean, sure, it's a quad shotgun, but I think you'll find that Unreal didn't actually feature a quad shotgun. And the reason why this is present is because the weapon itself was originally planned for Unreal, but then, for one reason or another, fell to the wayside. But that didn't stop the supremely talented modder behind this, one Magus Marissa, from resurrecting it and giving it a new lease of life here. As far as I can tell, the work undertaken in order to put this weapon back in working rotation was actually fairly extensive. For one, I don't believe the original weapon ever had a firing animation, let alone a reload animation, yet here they both are, present and accounted for. And in practice, boy is this weapon wonderful to use. Its primary fire makes just absolute mincemeat of lower tier enemies, whereas the alt fire does indeed unleash all four barrels at the same time with a rather beefy blast that does a damn fine job of taking down chunkier enemies, such as the Pinkies. Naturally, the main drawback to using this weapon, especially in more confined and heavily populated sections, would be the reload time. But even then, when the effects are just this joyously messy, taking a few hits in the meantime is a price I'm willing to pay. Now, when I think of Unreal, I inevitably think of the Flak Cannon. This is pretty much the unofficial mascot of Unreal to me, a weapon which shoots hot chunks of metal directly into enemy faces, and for good measure, features an alt fire which launches the entire cartridge, pretty much turning it into a grenade shot. It is essentially the super shotgun to the Stinger's regular shotgun mode, and I love it. It is a bona fide classic. And speaking of classics, we also have access to the shock rifle, a weapon that I also love to bits, but one that I've never been quite as good at using. And that's because it's got a bit of an interesting function when it comes to how to get the most bang for your buck out of every shot. You've got an energy orb which launches on the secondary fire. It does a lot of damage in its own right, but if you can then detonate the energy orb with a primary fire shot, it will do an even bigger explosion that just pretty much ruins everything in the immediate vicinity. Speaking of ruining everything in the immediate vicinity, let me introduce you to the Minigun, a absolutely furious sounding weapon that is accompanied by a downright wonderful firing animation, and it just shreds. That is its primary purpose, and that is what it achieves. And the secondary fire, in case you were wondering, also shreds, but just at a higher firing rate. So, yep, it's simple, it's straightforward, and quite frankly, it's everything a minigun-style weapon should aspire to be. After the giddy heights of the last few weapons, I couldn't help but feel bad for the Razorjack when I finally acquired it, because it feels like a much less effective tool in comparison to the other weapons that I've showcased so far. Even more so when you use it in the wrong kind of situation, such as this one right here, where I'm doing a terrible job of actually hitting enemies and having those blades just ricochet back into my own face. Sticking briefly to the lower end of weapons here, we also have the Dispersion Pistol, which is very much a fallback weapon should you run low on reserves for the likes of your auto mag, because this has a recharging energy pool. It's not particularly strong to begin with, but you can, as you may have just seen, acquire upgrades throughout the course of play that will transform the weapon and increase the heft of the bolts you fire. Secondary can also be used to make the blast even more powerful, and serves to be useful in a pinch when the rest of your ammo reserves are running low. So the 8-ball launcher is pretty much the rocket launcher of Unreal. It fires up to 6 consecutive homing rockets at a time, which is pretty neat. It can also be used as a grenade launcher on the alt-fire, but the name, I know it's meant to be in relation to the ammunition you actually use, but now I just want a rocket launcher that can do up to 8 at a time. God damn it. Now, believe it or not, the quad shot isn't the only weapon here in DoomReal to make it back off the scrap heap. We've also got the Demolisher. This is... I don't even know how to describe this. It's a granite slab attached to a pipe that fires really, really big bullets. Main drawback, however, is that the general heft of the thing actually makes it quite difficult to aim. Your character will constantly try and shift the weight around, and I just had full-on potato-itis when it came to landing a decent shot with that. So yeah, moving on. Things got a little choppy from here on in terms of acquiring weapons and being able to show them in chronological gameplay order, so I thought, screw it, let's just type in give weapons and show off all of the bits in between. This is the Proto Mag. Yet another resurrected weapon for DoomReal. It's a precursor to the Auto Mag. It's got a slower fire rate, both on primary and secondary, and also does less damage as a result. So you might be wondering why even use it. Apparently it's more accurate, but by the time I had it, I was already having too much fun with the other weapons. So the Stunner is an interesting resurrected weapon. This has a primary fire that can knock enemies further away. The secondary draws them closer. Obviously, if you charge it longer, the stronger the pull or the push is going to be. Unfortunately, it deals such a pitiful amount of damage that it's only really useful if you want to knock things off ledges or, you know, into the abyss. And in most of the maps I've been playing, there's not a lot of that available, so it's another weapon that kind of falls by the wayside. Not that you'll be using it for long anyway, because the ammo capacity for it is just threadbare, which means it won't be long before you're moving on to absolute monsters like this thing. This is the Auto Cannon. Pretty much the more stable and faster firing big brother to the Demolisher, at least with regards to the primary fire. Secondary unleashes all barrels at the same time for extra application of dye, and yeah, you might want to watch out for that splash damage. The Impaler's pretty friggin' neat. Secondary shoots out a homing death laser that can hit multiple enemies. Primary shoots out multiple shards of crystals that make things go splat. What's not to love? Flamethrower does flamethrower things. Also features an ult that shoots out a big old glob of napalm. Speaking of globs, the bio rifle is present and accounted for. I don't know why, I've just never really enjoyed using the bio rifle. It's good at the damage dealing, at least in Unreal, but it's never felt like an enjoyable gun to fire. I mean, even the ult is a complete snooze fest for me. Let's hold a bunch so we can fire an even bigger glob of snot. Big whoop. Gotta admit, the Fire Blaster actually fooled me at first into thinking it was some kind of upgraded bio rifle, what with the green flames it spits, and in that regard, it does feel much better to fire as a weapon in general. But yeah, another resurrected gun does exactly what it says on the tin. Pretty decent. Sniper rifle's gonna sniper rifle. The zoom function acts exactly as I'd expected to, although I gotta give particular props to that rather nice looking visual filter on the zoom scope itself. Peacemaker is interesting, if not extremely unwieldy. Primary fire allows you to set it, holding down the primary sets it for a longer timer, whereupon it takes absolutely forever to unfurl and then spew some rockets at enemies in the immediate vicinity, which I really wish would just hit for much bigger explosions than they currently do. Secondary will apparently let it detonate as is, but I never really got much usage out of that. I was too busy eviscerating things with other weapons, such as this. This is basically an auto mag that was raised on a steady diet of steroids, gold-plated for additional bling factor, and then equipped with a 100 bullet mag that spits bullets out at such a velocity that it actively forces you backwards whenever you use the primary, or indeed the secondary. I'll take your entire stock. Items! Those items are, geez, you got the gnarly fruit seeds that actually grow the damn plant when you scatter them, so nice for a little bit of a downtime snack. Wouldn't recommend in the heat of a battle because you're more likely to just, you know, keel over and die. You got the rather useful minigun sentry, which you can plonk down in order to help you thin out the herd while you deal with, let's say, more pressing matters. You got the force field, which does indeed deploy some kind of force field. Gotta admit, I never really figured out the best kind of usage for this thing. It just kind of hovers there and doesn't really cover a lot of ground. Yeah. There's also the damage amplifier, which, as you'd imagine, amplifies your damage output, but I forgot where I put the footage for that, so instead, please enjoy this footage of me blowing myself up with the Peacemaker. Outside of the weapons and the items, there's a few other little neat touches here in DoomReal that I quite appreciate. One being the ability to go into third person and see that, yes, you do in fact have a 3D character model, replete with gestures for ample enemy humiliation. Not only that, but you can also choose which character model you wish to play as, which doesn't really do much gameplay-wise, but does change things such as the grunts that they make, and occasionally the gestures that they can pull off too. Also, you can spin the auto-mag. 10 out of 10. All in all, I'd say that playing through a good few maps with DoomReal has proven to be quite the intriguing experience. For one, when I first picked this up, I didn't expect it to contain quite as much resurrected content as it ended up having, and picking through these lost weapons and seeing this interpretation of how they may have functioned has been genuinely interesting. As for the balance of the weapons across the entire mod, I'd say at this point it's actually quite difficult to judge. When it comes to the higher end of things, I think a lot of the weapons here are in a fairly appropriate place. The Demolisher, the Autocannon, this thing, they all fit up there, and honestly, when you do get to the point of actually acquiring them through the course of normal gameplay, the ammo is light enough on the ground to the degree where you don't feel like you are suddenly OP as all hell and every challenge you come across is now trivial. Where it gets tricky, however, is how all of this stuff interacts with other, more traditional weapons on similar tiers. The sniper rifle, for example, feels pretty weak sauce in comparison to a lot of its compatriots, and I feel in that regard it could certainly do with a buff, or at least something supplementary when you're scoped in, maybe deal additional damage when you've got it fully zoomed. But honestly, it's down in the mid-tier where things get a little murky for me. There's a lot of new additions in here that naturally upset the balance somewhat, and I feel that at this point they're kind of struggling to find their niche, because this feels very much like a mod that's aiming to be more traditionally played. It's not aiming more along the lines of the usual OP-style weapon mod, where everything is ridiculous so it doesn't really matter too much. So that's certainly something that I'll be keeping an eye on for tweaks and changes going forwards. If anything though, I'd say that DoomReal still manages to be quite the enjoyable gameplay mod and is certainly well worth checking out, especially for all of that tremendous effort that's gone to bringing those lost weapons back to life. And on that note, if you do indeed want to check this mod out for yourself, you'll be happy to know that the link, as usual, is in the description below. While I'm at it, I'd like to give a great big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon. Thank you so very much for supporting the channel and for helping to make content like this possible. If you're interested in lending a hand yourself, maybe you'd like to see your name in the credits, maybe you'd like to gain access to my videos before anyone else, heck, maybe you just enjoy the smell of burning money. If that's the case, you'll find a link to my Patreon page also in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments, and feel free to suggest any mod you'd like to see me cover in future editions of Doom Mod Madness. This has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.